So welcome everyone. My name is Carolyn Matisky. I serve as the director for the SUNY SAIL Institute and Organizational Development for System Administration. Welcome to Leaders Learning Live. This is an ongoing program that is offered by SAIL the third Thursday of every month on a wide array of topics that will help you as a higher education leader. So today's program is titled Cabinet Dynamics, and we've got a wonderful group, but I want to make sure that you see what's on the calendar ahead. If there are other topics that we're offering between now and the end of the calendar year, there is plenty of time to learn more and register on the SAIL webpage. So you'll find also our very large library of on-demand programs of topics that we've covered over the past 3 years. So if there's more that you'd like to learn, especially in the summer months when things are a little bit slower for most people on a campus, now is the time to think about your professional development. So we've got a great calendar ahead and really excited about today's program too. Our learning objectives, Jack, did you want me to share these objectives or?
Yeah, just basically people can see them. You can walk through them, and I'll just refer to them in a general sense to kick us off in the next minute or so.
Sure. Well, we are really happy that our senior leadership fellow, Jack Oliva, who you've heard from, is going to be able to have this fantastic conversation with people representing all of these different perspectives. So we have invited a campus president. We also have a vice president for academic affairs, as well as someone beyond the SUNY system. And we have the VP for information technology and chief information officer from RPI. So we've got a fantastic lineup, and Jack will give them formal introductions in a moment. But I think it's important that we've got perspectives from each of those roles. We want to make sure that senior leaders really have some insight into how cabinets strategize, communicate, and collaborate in the interest of having the institution be successful. So we know that these are usually very diverse groups of leaders that have come together. They see the world in very different ways, but encouraging a sense of belonging among that senior level team to make critical decisions is important. So we're going to explore some best practices for overcoming challenges and conflicts and understand how to quite balance harmony and discord while empowering the wider campus community to move forward with your institutional goals. So we've got a large, ambitious set of learning objectives today, but I know this is going to be an interesting conversation. And we also encourage you to put your comments and questions in the chat throughout the hour. So we will make sure that we're monitoring that chat throughout, and we want to make sure that this is going to meet your learning needs. So thank you, Jack.
Okay, you're going to start? You want me to start, Carolyn? Go ahead.
Sure. So Jack is, as I mentioned, the Senior Leadership Fellow for the SAIL Institute, and he is joined by Erika Hackman. So Erika, do you want to give a wave? Great. I know Jack will have a more pointed intro question for you, but just want to let the audience know that we've got someone representing SUNY Orange today, and Erika serves as the Vice President for Academic Affairs. We also have a close friend of the SAIL Institute. He serves as a mentor for our CIO Leadership Academy. We have John Kolb from RPI. And we have President Belinda Miles from Westchester Community College. Hi, Belinda.
Hi. Hello.
All right. So with that very brief introduction, I'm going to pass it over to our moderator for today's conversation. Welcome, Jack.
Thank you. Well, I want to first start out by thanking my three panelists who are joining us today. As you can see, by the sort of diversity, if you will, of the roles, the leadership roles of our three panelists, you're going to see a number of different perspectives, because when we talk about leadership at this level, we're talking probably the most complex machinery in terms of leadership on the campus. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go, but it has to be from the start in every way a dynamic relationship, very much dependent on strong listening skills, um, an ability to learn every single day in the job, and a strong ability to communicate in all sorts of directions, with flexibility, because the effectiveness of the leadership will depend on the ability for the people at the cabinet level to develop these bonds. So I thought to start us off, it would be good for each of our panelists to say just a few words, a couple of minutes each, about the structure of the cabinet that they live in. Why don't we start with John, then we'll go to Belinda, and then we'll go to Erika.
Well, thanks, Jack, and hopefully everybody can hear me. It's wonderful to be here, particularly with the three of you, and I'll try to get us off to a good start. So our cabinet at RPI is chaired by the president. It has about a dozen people in it, including the provost, VPs of various things, general counsel, and so on. We have something called portfolios, which are basically divisions. So I have a division of the chief information officer, which is mostly the IT side of things and information resources like the libraries. That's a portfolio which I represent on the cabinet. And then I sit next to the CFO, I sit next to the person that worries about physical plant, the person that does institute advancement, and so on. And then that structure gets expanded to a broader leadership group, which includes all of our deans and some of our very specialized programs. And we meet a couple times a year in retreats and so on. But I think, at least from my perspective, and we'll see if Erika and Belinda agree with this, at least for me, it's very important for me to be at the table, listening to people so I can think more strategically about what we need to do as we go forward with things. So just to get us going.
Thanks, John. Belinda, why don't you pick it up?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Glad to be here as well. I, as president of the college, chair our weekly cabinet. We do meet once a week we try to keep it to an hour actually, but we schedule 2 hours because you just never know. The nature of cabinet does change thematically, sometimes informative, sometimes we're working on a project together, sometimes we're being accountable for particular outcomes and we're tracking those along the way. My cabinet consists of the college's vice presidents as our standing members. And we occasionally invite in other of our direct reports for specific topics, but we don't have them sit through an hour or two of items that may not be pertinent to their needs or input at that time. So we're mindful of that. We do have a broader group called, we have 2 groups, one called SALT, which is the Strategic Action Leadership Team. That's every administrator, the deans, directors, supervisors. That's all of our folks that get together. We did not have such a group that got together. I met that group during my interview and they said, gee, we don't get together in a meeting. I said, we're going to fix that. So that session, which is kind of like a grad seminar, where we have various topics and different leaders that are able to present. And we have a subgroup called EXALT, the Executive Action Leadership Team, which sounds, we like acronyms. And that's cabinet with selected direct reports that gets together for more action. We need to work on our next big grant, or there's we're checking in on an aspect of the strategic plan. And so I'll leave it there to say that we have various configurations to make sure that we're getting the message out broadly, and with the expectation that that what we're doing is going to trickle down throughout the organization.
Thank you. Erika?
Hi there. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for spending your noon hour with us. And just wanted to say thank you to Jack, my former excellent CAO colleague, for inviting me to participate, and my neighbor, Belinda, across the river in Westchester County, and my new friend, John, upstate. So this is just a delightful way to spend the noon hour today. I would say, I would describe our cabinet at SUNY Orange as being a broader in representation. So our cabinet is mostly almost entirely management confidential and designation that we use in the SUNY system for administrators. But we actually include, chaired by the president, all the vice presidents, of which there are currently 3, all of our associate vice presidents, and then a few key leaders from other areas, such as our director of continuing and professional education, sort of workforce development, communications, executive director. So a few other administrators that are part of that team, but largely the president's leadership team. That group does meet monthly and really has an advisory role for serving the president and advising and supporting the president. And I would describe it as somewhat light on decision making. Decision making really rests more so with the executive leadership team, which is the president and the 3 vice presidents who meet weekly. So the cabinet engages in a lot of planning activity, a lot of thoughtful deliberation and assessment of, just like Belinda described, current projects for responding to SUNY guidance and opportunities. And really, again, just supporting the president and executing the strategic plan and her vision for the college.
Okay, so immediately you have 3 different institutions, 3 different leadership roles, and very different configurations in terms of who those leaders bring around the table to work in the institution. So we'll jump right in and say, okay, so now each of the leaders on our panel has a group that they essentially lead and have to represent, but they have to work with other leaders around the table who have their own groups to represent. So what I'd like to ask Erika and then John to respond to briefly a little bit about how you champion the needs and from an advocacy standpoint, the people in the division you represent, while also managing, maybe managing is not quite the right word, but also working in the expectations of everybody else around that cabinet table. Why don't we start with Erika and then we'll go to John on that one.
Sure. Thanks, Jack. When I think about this question, I think about, again, because our cabinet, as I described, is not really essentially focused on decision making. For me, as the chief academic officer, I oversee the largest division of a college. I oversee the division of a college that really is serving the primary mission, right, which is teaching and learning. However, I believe that every cabinet meeting that I participate in is an opportunity for team building and coalition building, because I need to work with my colleagues, my vice president colleagues that are on sort of the same organizational sort of level as me, but everyone else who's in that room has a key role in helping us serve students and live out that teaching and learning mission. So I see every cabinet as an opportunity to engage with those colleagues, whether they be in facilities, whether they be in IT, admissions, to invite them into a conversation and not come to the table with demands, right? To identify opportunities where we can collaborate in support of the college's mission. And I think the other important part of this is that our president really sets the tone that provides sort of equal playing field, equal footing for the various divisions of the college, and really sets a tone of, civility and respect that we're all sort of held accountable to. And that's really important because in order to have a thoughtful, productive dialogue, the various sort of 360-degree perspectives need to be represented so that we understand the impact of decision making. So again, I see those conversations as team building and coalition building in service to the college's mission.
John, want to pick the same one up?
Yeah, that's hard after Erika because that was very eloquently stated. But I think the engagement piece is really important. How do we engage each other? In a role that I have, our portfolio is mostly an enabling portfolio. We bring the tools to the table, whether it's the libraries, whether it's IT, whether it's other aspects. We bring tools to the table that can help people do their work, but we better understand what they're trying to accomplish if we're going to do that well. So having those conversations that Erika mentioned and the engagement with our colleagues is really important. You can do some of that formally through the cabinet, through other mechanisms. I've also found one of the advantages of higher ed is you can get involved with things in different ways, and I encourage all of my staff to do this. But for instance, I'm the advisor to the Theater Honorary Society, of all things. I helped the athletic director create a academic liaison program for each of the teams on the campus and so on. And that allows me to understand what some of the different portfolios are trying to accomplish. That's much different than I would maybe normally get involved with. And I've tried to push this through my organization so we can do that, and across the board, if you will. And it was interesting when we put this academic liaison program in place. I was one of the first people to be able to choose a team. And I went out of my way to find a team that was actually struggling in terms of their coach and everything else, which at the time was our women's soccer team. It's not the premier ice hockey team and all that at RPI, but it was really important. The really good news there is I found out that all those women are Lake Wobegon women. They're all above average, and they don't need me very much, but we enjoy the interaction. But that gives me a sense of what they're trying to accomplish as athletes and scholars, and keeps me grounded in terms of some of the things I'm doing, and that allows me to be a better advocate for students and others. And I've done the same thing on the faculty side and some of the staff side in various roles. So I think that works very well. And, maybe one last quick comment is I think not only enabling is part of our portfolio, but how do we integrate and, synthesize and integrate across the university? And to do that, I have to have a better understanding what a lot of folks are trying to accomplish, not just one group. And so you mentioned listening, Erika mentioned engagement. I think those are key components of that.
Thanks, John. So now for Belinda, my question for you though is, so now you have around your table a group of leaders who come with all the right intention and all the right vision, but there's going to be conflict of all sorts and levels. And I wondered if you could address how you as the president, but also as the leader of this group, address conflicts that might arise, and if you can, if your chief of staff plays a role in that, is there a role that person plays? And can you talk a little bit about that? Okay.
Sure. Well, I think conflict is inevitable. And I actually think that conflict can be healthy if it's handled okay. I definitely believe in cognitive complexity, which is a term that I learned in a book called Redesigning Collegial Leadership. Estella Mara Ben-Simon and Anna Newman, and where we recognize from the start that we don't want a cabinet that's monolithic. I don't need everybody who thinks the way I think and who always agrees with everything initially. We try to get them there over time, so we don't want groupthink. We want that diversity of thought. We want people to challenge ideas. So I welcome that kind of difference. Now, conflict can escalate and become problematic. I have had an experience where I needed to stop cabinet. I said, stop, we're going to stop talking right now. We're taking a 5-minute break, and some people needed to cool off, and we didn't need to address some of those issues in the meeting. There were other dynamics going on. So that I didn't know about, but we couldn't resolve them around the table with people who were not speaking with each other cooperatively. And so that's one idea. So I think the best thing is to try to be prepared for difference by having cross-functional teams. I believe in the meeting before the meeting after the meeting. That's a place where the chief of staff is very, very helpful because they know the issues. And because I do meet one-on-one with each of my direct reports, each of those VPs, as well as some of the other members in the extended cabinet, I'm aware where there's some differences of opinion or a desire to have more resources for a particular project, or wondering why we're still talking about whatever the issue is, technology or retention or what have you. So I think the cross-functional teams are very important for us to be reminded of what our focus is, what are we achieving, trying to achieve through our strategic plan, what is our collective North Star, so that at the end of the day, we can point to these goals and these values and this way of working together to say, this is what we're aiming to achieve, and how does what we're talking about here relate to that mission. And so that those are some of the strategies, but not in public. We don't want to do any shaming or you know, waving the finger and saying that's not how we work together. The one-on-ones are really great for vetting what the challenges are ahead of time, and then working to circumvent them so they don't become explosive.
Thank you. You know, Belinda, thinking just a little bit about this meeting, before the meeting and after the meeting, it's an interesting concept, and also the idea of engagement. Can you talk just a little bit more specifically about ways in which you work with your leaders to maintain open and comfortable, transparent communication across among them, and extending the idea of cross teams, cross-divisional teams, techniques you might use to encourage some of the leaders around your table to get outside their home circle and take on some leadership roles that almost force them almost completely out of their circle, or at least a good distance, so that they stir the pot in a different way, in a positive way. So if that sort of sets up the question, if you could speak to that a little bit.
There are a lot of people in higher ed who lament that, oh, if it weren't for all these meetings, I can get my work done. You may have heard that quote on your campus someplace, but we do use the meetings as the space to do collective work, to bring two heads are better than one, sometimes 3, 5, however many we need to get in a room to have varied perspectives. And so there are lots of structures that are baked into academia, our faculty senate. The Senate has certain committees. We formed a group called ASPEN, the highest award in community colleges, but it's Allied Strategic Planning Engaged Networks. We like acronyms, I told you. And so those, the ASPEN teams are teams related to our big 3 goals in our strategic plan. And they're co-chaired. Each subunit is co-chaired by 3 individuals, an administrator, a faculty member, and a staff member. Now, and so that's a pretty different sort of configuration to have them as a leadership triad of each of those groups. So they're convening individuals around the objectives and tracking accountability and the like. So I think having folks get together in those kinds of configurations gives voice to many who might not have been in that type of role previously. So it's not just the deans doing the academic affairs work, et cetera, but it's a way to have that cross-pollination of activities. And that came from being in the pandemic, the early days of sitting and looking at these Zoom screens. And I could see the fatigue and the fear, the fright on my team members' faces as we're sitting there. So I realized that I couldn't lead from what happened to the hierarchy. Not that, we weren't around the table together. So we needed more people involved, and we needed a decentralized leadership model. And we needed those individuals to feel empowered so that they could stay engaged and stay connected. And it worked. And we're now trying to maintain that momentum as we've moved away from the heart of the pandemic to keep individuals at the table, leading the discussions, working on the reports, working with their colleagues, and growing their leadership so that they can contribute even further.
Thanks. So let me now drill down a little bit more specifically on those ideas. and ask Erika and John to talk about specific approaches, tactics, initiatives they've used in their role to build these teams, with these team relationships with their cabinet colleagues. Again, one of the things we talk about in the domains of knowledge when I do that is that when people think of their team, they often will always think inside their home, and thinking that teams can not only be built laterally, but they can be built on various levels for the issues that have to be addressed. So let me ask Erika first to take that. And then when she's done, John, if you'd follow with the same question.
Sure. Interestingly, when Belinda was talking, it reminded me of a sort of a similar approach. When last year, we have an annual retreat with our cabinet. We were really looking at our strategic plan, almost halfway through the strategic plan, and had identified some key priorities, as an executive leadership team with the president that really needed to be implemented, and fleshed out and worked on over the last academic year. And so what we did in that cabinet was we identified cross-functional sort of teams within cabinet that could take ownership of those initiatives. But the president was very clear at that time and said, the vice presidents are not going to lead these initiatives. We are going to choose other members of cabinet to be in the leadership position. So to Belinda's point, that decentralization is critical to have the rest of that cabinet really feel like they have a voice and a role and are empowered to do the work that we've hired them to do, right? So the other part of that I thought was really successful over the last academic year was to not have that cabinet work sort of siloed as an administrative function. We have a member, our leader of our shared governance organization actually sits on cabinet as well. And so that person is a full-time faculty member. And the shared governance leader actually solicited membership from throughout the campus. So any staff member, faculty member that wanted to be part of those teams to implement the strategic priority plans for that year were invited to work with the cabinet members who were serving as leadership and actually co-chairing each of those working groups. So that was important for a larger campus-wide engagement of the work, so that, again, these priorities that are connected to the strategic plan, there was empowerment and buy-in built in, with these working groups throughout the whole organization, so that folks knew what was going on. Folks knew how to help shape some of that work. One of them, for example, was a team that was formed around prior learning assessment. We know in the SUNY system, but this is a real priority. With a system-wide policy that was recently updated. And so all of our campuses are trying to understand how can we move this work forward and serve, a new population of students in a more responsive way. And that can be a scary topic to launch on your campus if you don't have a lot of that prior learning assessment built into the structure of your college already. So having faculty, staff, and cabinet working together to further that work made it less scary for the rest of the campus to embrace it and to be part of it. So I think that was really critical.
Interesting. Thinking as I'm listening to you and to John in particular, but also to Belinda, thinking of experiences as when I was a vice president and the ways in which we were able to and not able to, for all sorts of predictable reasons, work across these divides. So the idea of the campus, the shared governance representative, is a very interesting one, because that really, as I look at it, think about it, erodes the wall that oftentimes gets created between a Senate or a shared governance group and the administration. So, John, you want to take that same question?
Yeah, these are really good points. I think I really like Belinda's North Star because if you establish the right culture, a lot of other things follow through, whether it's getting the shared governance folks in place or others, and that can certainly trump strategy most of the time. So the culture is incredibly important to keep working on. I think one of the things that's interesting, and maybe it's particularly in the IT field, is most of the people that come up through the IT field are relatively tactical. I had to solve this problem, I had to solve that problem, and so on. And then you get to the cabinet level, and your president looks at you and says, "Well, I'd really like you to think strategically about what we're doing in this area." And it's like, "Oh, okay, I have to put a new hat on," and so on. And then your colleague comes over and says, "But I'd really still like you to fix this PC, or the AV is not working today," or that sort of thing. So you can't escape it completely, whether you like it or not, in the IT field. And so I got over that hump. But then how do you think strategically of bringing the things to bear that you have some control over, and engaging with the rest of the Institute strategically? And I've been part of several of our strategic planning exercises. I mentioned before, I get involved with a number of things. I was just the co-chair of our provost search, and that was a wonderful opportunity. We have a new provost starting in August, and it was great to see that process play out. And is that tactical or strategic, being involved with something like that? I think it's a little bit of both, but it's helpful to get us in front of things like that. The other thing that I think happens in IT is sometimes we're we're listed as the place or the group that says no to everything. No, you can't do it this way. No, you can't do that, and so on. And some of that's cybersecurity. Some of that's the complexity of introducing the technology. Some of it's a lot of things, and trying to reverse that a little bit in our own culture to say, how do we work with our colleagues to say yes to things, but we have to do it in a certain way, or here's a better way we can do it for the Institute as a whole. And how do you have those conversations? Is that strategic or tactical? Yes, it's both, but incredibly important to our colleagues as we go forward. I think I told all of you before when we were talking, I have a very interesting portfolio, not only the libraries and AV and IT and so on, but for whatever reasons, I have a research machine shop that reports into me. So I literally do have the largest hammers on campus, if nothing else works in terms of solving problems. So, but making sure that we swing those the right way is always part of the equation. But anyway, I'll stop there, Jack.
Yeah, I'm the interesting piece from when you mentioned tactical in a specific way, and then I think about the role of the individual who has to lead the technology conversation on the campus. Even if I put the COVID experience aside for the moment, one of the challenges that I know I faced, and it was not about the individual who was in the leadership position, and in the 10 years I was at FIT, we had actually 3 people in that role, but is how creative that leader could be in taking the tactical side of the work, the fixing, the cybersecurity, all those sort of checks and balances thing that really are essential to the whole technology infrastructure for the campus. But then understanding that the faculty will come to the conversation about technology maybe in a tactical way, but probably less so, and oftentimes have an idea that might not be possible with the technology, or might be possible, but the tactical person has to think in a different way. So hearing the conversation that you have and thinking about the role of the CIOs, that from my experience, the diversity of the responsibility that you and your colleagues in that level have, I found it to be an enormous field for learning, not only for faculty, but also for the leaders of the academic side. So department chairs, deans, perhaps, and so on. Okay, so let's see. Let's think a little bit more about this managing up and this team building I alluded to a minute ago. And John, speak a little bit more. So you're looking at the complexity and the various roles in your unit. What are some things that you might be using to help the president understand the role that you have? I mean, assuming that the president does not come from that technology field necessarily, but has to understand the many balls that you have to keep in the air. Are there ways in which you've worked with your president to sort of do that? And let me see if you can grab a few minutes to talk about that.
Sure, Jack, thanks for the question. And let me just tag on to something else we just talked about. In my career, and I started out in a research center here at Rensselaer, and then I was running a small computing group, and then I ended up in the dean's office in engineering, and I was running something called core engineering, which is the first 2 years of our academic programs. And I think I had mentioned this to all of you before, but it's kind of interesting how you get pigeonholed. When I went into that job, I was a computing guy that didn't know anything about curriculum. And coming out of that job, I was a curriculum guy that was now applying to be the dean of computing. And what did I know about computing, right? So, what it helped me to do is understand what people were trying to do, like Erika, in terms of leading the new curriculum development, the teaching learning activities, and so on. And then how does technology play in that? That feeds into the question you just asked, because I can sometimes put an envelope around my conversation with the president or the trustees or others about here's what we're trying to accomplish at a large level. The president's already articulated this, and here's how technology can help curriculum development or one of our new research thrusts or something else. And I can put it in a better context, not a, if you will, a techie context, but here's what we're trying to accomplish overall for the university. The other piece, which I think a lot of us are spending time on now, is things like cybersecurity. Yes, that's something I spend a lot of time on, but I typically talk about it with the president in terms of risk to the university, not in terms of the latest ransomware or something like that. The issue is, thinking more broadly about the operational, financial, reputational risks to the university is the right way to position that, rather than, by the way, they flipped this bit and then this is what happens. That's not terribly useful to most other folks. So, so part of it is also language. Understand the vocabulary of how others are going to describe this. The president is certainly not going to go to his board and say, they flipped this bit and this is what happens. That's not going to be terribly useful, even with a group of technical folks, but they will understand the fiduciary risk and or reputational risk of something. So I will stop there.
Erika, before I get to you, there's a question in the chat, which I think draws on this idea of communication. I'm going to read it, and then whoever would like to take it can take it. The question says, how does your leadership collaborate in initiatives alignment that have for some areas the same goals, but lack of cross-functional communication and understanding of the work? Can you share an example? It sort of picks up a little bit on what I had said earlier about tech folks having some understanding of what the department chairs or the faculty do. Does anybody want to grab that one? And you can all answer it if you'd like. Erika, you want to jump on that one? Or?
Sure. I was gonna not steal the stage yet if I've got another question coming up, but let me start with this one. And Alma, I'm really glad that you asked it because it's about guided pathways for me. And when our college started implementing the guided pathways framework, we did not have a mechanism currently for thoughtful engagement that was part of an institutional structure that invited anyone to the table. So, staff from all levels, faculty, administration. And so we created a meeting, which we called the SUNY Orange Experience. And we were trying to brand guided pathways for SUNY Orange using the SUNY Orange Experience to make it something that was lasting, something that wasn't tied to what folks thought would just come and go as a SUNY initiative. We really wanted this to transform our culture. That's what the whole point of our guided pathways work was. So we created the SUNY Orange experience. We branded it as SOX. So we don't have as many brilliant acronyms as Westchester does, but we do have SOX. And you know, that meeting is built in a way that is not a meeting, right? Is a discussion. We have a commitment to engaging with data. We're very thoughtful about making sure we have diverse perspectives from around the institution to help implement the guided pathways framework. And so that is just one example of if you don't have something in place, then you have to create it and make it really different than everything else you do.
Anybody else want to take that on? Belinda or John?
Well, I'll add that we were running the risk of having initiative fatigue at one point because we were so aggressive about reforms and transformation at the college. So we had the opportunity to replicate the CUNY ASAP study, which was known to double their 3-year graduation rate. So we got funding to do that. We became a guided pathways college. We applied for and got our first Title V grant in recent years. So student success was our mantra. And it became really hard for different parts of the organization to understand, well, what's the priority? How does this fit in? Which set of objectives? And the objectives did overlap. We were looking at recruitment, strong onboarding for our students, helping them to get onto a path, retaining them, looking at credit accumulation. And so we used the completion by design model, the Gates lost momentum model, as sort of a framework to say that we're starting here, we're moving across the student experience, the student journey. So the SOX, looking at the experience, is really key to say that it's all connected and these are not competing goals, and making sure that we can use some of the areas like technology. If we have technology for early alert, or if we have a stronger LMS, we're able to communicate with students. So looking at those generic kinds of aspects of each of the initiatives, data informed, teasing out the data to look at equitable outcomes. These were universal practices that related to each of the initiatives. Yes, we had to respond to each funder individually, but we were able to use some of the standard tools that go across the system to say we are really on the same page. And you know, every aspect, every one of these initiatives has a technology component, a data component, an assessment of equity component, you know, how are our students progressing components. So finding those commonalities and then having, but I like the idea of the superstructure, because it still becomes a little loose when you have this targeted group that has this set of deadlines and that one that has a different set of issues with the accounting department on how to manage that grant. So I've been watching that SOX. It's a cool notion. I hope the branding is working.
John, you have a comment in there too, or?
I'm not sure I can add a really good comment other than with all these acronyms flying around, and I thought the IT folks were bad with acronyms. You know, I'll just throw one more acronym out there from our childhood, WTII, which is We Talk in Initials. I think it's from Winnie the Pooh or one of those places. So, but no, this is all good. This is all really good in terms of the right approach. So.
Okay, so Erika, thinking as the Vice President for Academic Affairs, and my experiences, of course, too. So your deans are individual leaders of your academic units, your chairs, and so on. So what are a few steps that you have taken specifically, either before the meeting and after the meeting or during a meeting, to bridge the gap between what the academics are thinking and what your president needs to know about the academics to help her envelop that into the larger campus conversation?
Sure. I suppose the most salient example right now has to do with reorganization, which is always a very challenging process on any campus, right, at any time. So our college is transitioning to a different leadership structure for academic affairs and student services. So I will be overseeing both in the next fall. So we're losing our vice president for student services. So that has been, a difficult conversation for a lot of folks to understand. And while, the president has had, open forums and talks with, the shared governance leadership group often about, this plan, folks really need to be able to express their questions and concerns at a much more intimate level than an open forum, with the president. So I find myself, as obviously part of this reorganization, making sure that I'm intentionally inserting myself in departmental and divisional conversations, organizing meetings with the academic affairs leadership team, all the department chairs, to collect some of those issues so that I can sensitize the president to what the pinching areas are, right, of this work, right? Where the questions are, where the uncertainty lies, where the opportunities lie as well. Because as she is sort of the face of this reorganization, she needs my help in trying to understand where the concerns lie and kind of navigating the minefield, right, of issues that she could step into in these public forums that are important to her. But she needs to know sort of what's really being said, on the ground between folks and between offices. So, the same is true for sort of the reverse direction, that in supporting the president and achieving this vision of what she's laid out for the college, I have to translate in a way that academic affairs folks will understand and respect, right, the opportunities that lie in ahead of us in terms of serving students in a better way, when there's better intentional collaboration across, these two typically siloed divisions of the college. So, I see myself as a translator between the president and the people and the president to a large extent. And that's the only way that these kinds of efforts can actually work effectively.
You mentioned the word translate. We do for the chairs a session that we call Managing Up, and it's organized relatively like this one, actually. Sue Phillips and I have been the panelists for a number of those, and then one of our other colleagues asks us a series of questions. And Sue, each time she gets this particular question, and she talks about the role of the chair as the translator. And how the chair has to learn to speak a number of different languages over time, so that in that translation, the message gets across, but the message doesn't get distorted or misrepresented. And that all of us need to learn that translation, because if we've all studied foreign languages and can talk about a time when we thought we were saying one thing in that language and realized we either offended somebody or asked for something that wasn't impossible to get. So I like the idea of the translator, and that, by the way, it occurs at every level. And I could, Belinda, I'm sure would ask her to talk a little bit about the connection with the board in a minute too, because the president has to be the translator in many respects between all the things that y'all are talking about at the cabinet level, regardless of what your job is, and what the president needs to be able to help the board, however that board is structured, understand. So, Belinda, I have a couple of questions which will take us to the end of the formal piece, and then there'll be a little bit of space for folks. One of the things has to do, it's obvious now as you listen to everybody speaking here, the cabinets are diverse in all sorts of ways. So as a leader, as a sort of primary leader on that campus, some quick things that you would talk about, ways in which you help the diverse people around your cabinet table feel included. If you could talk a little bit about that, and then I'll have another question for you. Oh, and by the way, anything you want to add about the translation factor with the Board of Trustees is something I know that people will be interested in because a number of, I mean, I had a relationship with some of the Board of Trustees members too, but I had to also be a good translator and understand the message. But the president really is the one that has to help the board. So if you could take that first, that'd be great.
Okay, well, there's a lot there. Certainly, sitting around the cabinet table, we have lots of representation of many stakeholder groups, many groups that are reflective of our student body. And so we invite all of those voices, all of any issues, any concerns related to any group. That is really the purpose of what we're doing, is to serve the students that come to the college, and to do that in a maximum kind of way. So we always ask, how does this affect students? How does this relate to our strategic plan, our major objectives? So those are questions. Who's missing? Who else needs to be in this conversation? And as we're deliberating on issues at the cabinet level, we've learned to ask, what's the communication plan? What is the communication plan? And so that we can be very specific about getting messages out to various groups. Have we included, does this need to go to the board? Does this need to go to one of the Senate committees? How are we going to get this information out amongst the campus community? I think a more specific example that I've experienced is managing my E's and I's, my extroverts and introverts around the table, because some people are very engaged, but you can't really tell all the time. And so knowing who they are, and sometimes I'll help, not by saying, okay, you know, what are your thoughts now, but because I've had one-on-ones with my team members, I can ask them if they would please, if they would share the insights that they have on whatever the initiative is, that I know that they've done excellent work on, but and they may have even distributed the report to their colleagues, but I present that opportunity in the meeting so that they can speak to that specific thing, and then we can provide input and so forth, because again, being quiet doesn't mean that one is not engaged, and allowing that opportunity and creating that space for inclusion. And the leader has that role. As you said, you're translating, you're listening, you're knowing where there are gaps, you're knowing where there are connections. And so it's a lot of data to process. We're pulling it together for the team and giving everyone the opportunity for their information to emerge and be considered as very helpful to the group.
Thanks, Belinda. Before I give you the follow-up question, there's a question in the chat which I think connects. And this is, again, it's an open question. Any or all of you can respond to it. And the question is, love to hear tactics how each of you shape/shift the culture that you want to see at your institution. And again, thinking about, none of us walk into a job and get to handpick our team. We inherit a culture. Now, sometimes that culture has to be massaged and moved. So this is an excellent question when we talk about communication and so on. So who would like to grab it? And you can all sort of jump in if you want. John, you want to grab it first? Is that okay?
It's certainly okay. And just to pick up on something that Belinda said, I heard a term the other day that I had not heard before about an ambivert, which is halfway between an introvert and an extrovert, or somebody that can be both. And I think in some of these roles, some of us being, in higher ed tend to be more introverted, but we're forced into roles to be extroverted. So I think some of us tend to be more ambiverts, which is interesting. In terms of tactics, and the question in the chat, I think a lot of people in the university, students, staff, faculty, look to the leadership in terms of how they act, how they do their own jobs. So the one tactic I would say is, don't just say this is the way you want things, but do those, be the role model for others in terms of how you do things. I think Erika mentioned respectful ways. If you handle people respectfully, you'll see that filter through the rest of the culture in the university, and I think that's incredibly important. So not just do as I say, but do as I do, and live your life that way.
Erika and Belinda, you want to grab an answer to that question as well? Erika?
Yeah, you know, I think I echo what John says in terms of modeling that leadership. And, you know, when I talked about this reorganization and going and meeting with folks, that listening is really, really critical, as you said, Jack, at the beginning of our program today, but it's not enough. Listening needs to be followed with action in order to build trust. That's absolutely been my experience. So, you know, participating and talking with folks, and then taking action to address what you can, right? What you should, and letting them know that you've taken care of it. You know, you can't underestimate the impact and the importance of responsiveness. That really does build trust throughout the organization.
And I'll just add quickly that is shifting culture. You can use some of the objective sort of third-party techniques like an accreditation visit or standards that have been set by an external organization. Like what are those Aspen criteria? Maybe we should look at those and think about how we stack up to that, or what does it mean to be an Achieving the Dream Leader College, whether you're part of the organization or not, to look at those standards and say, here's what best in show looks like. So let's compare ourselves to that, and that could create that unified vision for what we could become, and also using the data that you're producing. So how are we doing? Let's shine the spotlight on where we are relative to graduation rates, retention, et cetera. And that way you don't have to be personally involved. I came into my role with a accreditation visit starting 90 days after my first date. So in some ways I became the leader of the institution before I became the leader of the people, but it was helpful to have those 14 standards, which is what they were in Middle States at the time, for us to look at this together and say, where are we going? Where do we want to be? Let's go.
Great answers. And I see another question in the chat, which is a great one. And I want to see if each of you could just give me 30 seconds on it. So we talk about leadership, and we talk about we're here for the students. So how do each of you engage students and involve students in the decision-making process on your campus, because they're, you know, not part of the cabinet necessarily, or at lower levels, they might not be part of a dean's group either. So if each of you could talk about that, let's start with Erika, and then I'll ask Belinda, and then I'll ask John.
Sure, I can just quickly say we have, I think, 14, 15 different shared governance committees that are assembled to support the work of the college. And each of those governance committees has a student representative that sits on it, at least one. So I think that's, you know, an important structure to have in place. Another example I'll just share is that we have our Student Services Center is going through a massive renovation of sort of a student space that was so dated, and, you know, furniture from 1960, I'm pretty sure. The students designed the redesign with the support of administration. Student Senate took it very seriously. And so that work is happening now. And it's been a great way to have students build, you know, some ownership of that project.
Okay.
I meet with our SGA leadership, their executive board, with as much regularity as we can muster. We have a student trustee who we connect with on a variety of issues, and he sits on the student government executive board. And we also have students on those Aspen network teams, so that they're connected in ways to see how the strategic plan is evolving. So we look for those ways to connect one-on-one with student leadership, and certainly student town halls would engage the entire student population for those who can attend.
John?
Yeah, if I can undo my mute, sorry. Both excellent points. I think not only the formal mechanisms that we can set up, but all the chances for informal dialogue with students is really helpful. We had a picnic last week for our students that are in something called the Arch program, which is a summer program at RPI. And it was great to sit down with 4 students for dinner, we're just munching over hamburgers and chips. And I ask them, what would you like to change? What's working, what's not working? And they're always a little tentative at first, but then they'll give you some pretty good feedback. And getting that feedback, I think it's really tough sometimes when you're at the cabinet level. You don't always see the ground level, and that ground level is incredibly important.
Thanks, John. Time's flying here, actually faster than I thought. Belinda, you mentioned a book earlier. Can you put in the chat the title of that book that you mentioned while we're all still connected, so people could see that? And then we're just about out of time, and we are really pretty particular about the starting and ending of these. So let me conclude our panel by thanking Belinda and Erika and John for their insight, for taking the time to share their thoughts with you. I also want to compliment the group. We got a lot of good questions. Oftentimes people come in and they have the opportunity of the chat, but they don't necessarily use it. So thank you for your participation. Those of us, most of us probably, started our career in a live room with our teaching and have gravitated to these talking to TV screens and computer screens. I personally find them a challenge. But when we could find ways in which to stay engaged because of the technology, it really helps. So thank you for your participation. And the final thing is, in the chat, not too many lines up, there's a link to a quick Survey Monkey that we try to do for every one of these. And if you'll share your thoughts with us on that, it's just under, it was in the middle of Carolyn's comments about the contact numbers for each of us on the panel. It's www.surveymonkey.com and a few other small things, which they're too small for me to read on my screen. So if you'll take a look there and click in there, and I'll leave the link open for about a minute. But again, thank you, Belinda, thank you, Erika, and thank you, John, and thank you, participants.
Thank you, Jack.
Thanks so much, Jack. Thanks everyone for coming.
Pleasure being with you all. Thank you.